you removed the Tennessee flag from the U.S. Attorney's Office after you were sworn in. And we have heard from several people that you did this. So I want to know, you told me it was because you thought the office was cluttered that you removed the flag. But you were there for the people of West Tennessee. You removed the Tennessee flag. So what did you do with it? Did you throw it in the trash? Did you put it in the closet? Why did you not see your appointment as having a duty to the people of West Tennessee?
As Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer, Senator, I represent the United States and the Department of Justice. And we're talking about the conference room where we give press conferences and similar public statements. And I felt it was fundamentally—
Mr. Ritz, that doesn't fly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to each of you. I know that you are excited about what the future holds for you and for your families. Mr. Edwards, one quick question for you. I had looked through your background, and it appears you have a lot of experience in civil matters, but district courts have many criminal cases. And I could only find one criminal case, just one, where you had been counsel in a criminal case. So build this out for me. You have no experience, basically, on the criminal side. So how would you function in that position as a district judge?
Thank you, Senator. Over the course of my career, I have handled several criminal matters, but you're correct that only one as counsel in federal court. But in my role as First Assistant U.S. Attorney, I have oversight over the criminal division in our office as well as the appellate division in our office. And over the last 15 or so months in that position, I have been involved with the entire criminal process and have learned.
So you're confident in your ability
yes,
to
Senator.
move forward handling
Absolutely.
criminal
Yes.
cases?
Yes,
okay.
thank you.
Mr. Long, let me come to you, if I may. As I went through your record, I noted your time as the acting chief of staff for Director Wray, and that caught my attention. I noted that you were there in that position when the Hunter Biden laptop story broke in October of 2020. Is that correct?
In October of 2020, Senator, I would have been the Deputy Chief of Staff.
The Deputy Chief of Staff, okay. And so you were there when the FBI, despite having possession of that laptop, refused to correct all the misinformation that was out in the media. And the FBI's mishandling of the Hunter Biden laptop is one example of why people think there's a two-tier system of justice. I did a telephone town hall last night with several thousand Tennesseans on that telephone town hall. And lack of trust with the FBI, just really a disappointment with the political cabal inside the FBI is something that came up repeatedly in the questions that people brought to me. I noted that you were also there when concerned parents that went to school board meetings were labeled as domestic terrorists. And also, during that time, the FBI targeted pro-life individuals. They allegedly obstructed the Hunter Biden tax probe. And this, we need to know what your participation in all of this was. So Senator Graham has already asked you about this, and I want to drill a little bit further on this. Did you participate in any meetings, any memos, any emails that would have provided discussion, advice, or guidance on how to handle the Hunter Hunter Biden laptop situation, did you participate in any meetings, any writings, any memos, any advice, any guidance on labeling parents as domestic terrorists? Did you participate in any meetings on how to handle parents at school board meetings? What was your knowledge of in your participation in those decisions and those actions that the FBI carried out during that time that you were there, the Deputy Chief of Staff, the Acting Chief of Staff?
Well, Senator, let me maybe explain my role a little bit as the Deputy Chief of Staff at the FBI.
I think we know. I don't want you to, my time's going to run out. I want you to answer the question. We know what the role is. We know what the job description is.
Well, Senator, specifically with respect to the Hunter Biden matter, I am a Department of Justice employee. Mm-hmm. I'm a judicial nominee. That is a pending matter, and it would
we
be...
We fully realize that. I'm asking, as did Senator Graham, and I know you didn't want to answer his question either, so why don't you submit for me in writing and include any emails, any memos, anything that you participated in? I would like to know. 2 tiers of justice is one of the main concerns of Tennesseans. They want fairness. They want equal treatment. And, sir, I have a problem with the fact that you were there in a leadership role during a time when actions were taken by a few people within the FBI that has caused enormous distrust. So I'm asking you to submit to me in writing so that we know what your participation was in this. It's something that has upset this country terribly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to each of you on your nominations, and thank you for being here today. And I know we're going to have some questions that'll come to you as QFRs, so we would ask that you address those. Judge Hall, I want to come to you. I think this work with David Weiss is something that you've heard us go back to. Senator Graham asked you about that, and you said you had no information, participated in no way in that investigation. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, Senator.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Did you have any knowledge of or any communication with the 2 IRS whistleblowers, Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler?
Senator, when I read about that whistleblowing in the news, I had no recollection of ever having met either individual.
Okay. Would you like to check your records and be sure you had no communication with them? And we'll put that in a QFR for you to give you the opportunity to double
Certainly,
check
Senator.
those records. Thank you very much. Judge Mahalchik, if I may come to you. We've had some discussion about the Spanier case, and I want to return to that because we're quite sensitive to this issue. In this committee, the president nominated Michael Delaney for a position. Mr. Delaney ended up withdrawing his nomination, and it all came down to his hardball tactics with a young woman, and this was in a sexual assault case. So it is, first of all, perplexing that we have another nominee before us who has a questionable ruling in a case, which we have in your ruling, and dealing with the role of Mr. Spanier's conviction of endangering the welfare of a child during his role as president of Penn State. So this comes across as lack of respect for children and the rule of law, and Senator Kennedy laid out very well how the court came back to you, and the Third Circuit actually said and wrote, and I'm quoting again, that you did not examine this case closely. And therefore, talk for about 30 seconds. If you don't examine cases closely, and if you have a record, a high rate of reversals, then how do we expect you, as you move to the court, to be more careful in your job and more careful in your decision making?
Senator, my rate of reversal in considering the body of my work over the last 10 years, including all civil and criminal decisions, is less than 2%. Most of the decisions reference...
Let me, you're not answering my question. All right, let's put it like this. How do we know you're going to be able to fulfill your duties as a judge? When we look at this, and the Third Circuit has written that you did not examine this case closely. This was a pretty high-profile case, and they called you down about that, and they reversed you in your decision. So how do we know you'll do your job? And how do we know what your method of statutorial interpretation is with the record that you've had?
Senator, the bulk of my record over the last 10 years reflects cases that have been either not appealed or sought reconsideration of by the parties before me, and I think that that evidences a trust by the bar and the public in my work. The bulk of my work that has been appealed has been affirmed by the district court and by the Third Circuit, and I think that that exhibits a basis for having faith in my work when there has been a reversal.
Okay, let me ask you this. Do you think you were right or wrong in the Spanier case?
Senator, the Third Circuit said that
No, that's not what I'm asking. I said, were you right or were you wrong?
Senator,
what led you to make that decision?
When I approached that case like I approach any case before me, I carefully read the parties' briefs. I had open and engaging argument with the parties.
Do you think you were right or wrong?
When I issued that decision, I thought I was doing it correctly. The Third Circuit found that I did it incorrectly, and I read that decision.
After they reversed you, did you agree with their reversal?
Yes, I would stand by what the Third Circuit has said.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to each of you on your nominations. And it's so wonderful to hear your introductions of your families. And I'm so pleased, Mr. Kimber, that you now have a congressional edict to be good to your mama. I think that is just awesome. We mamas like things like that. We're also informed by looking at your records and reading your writings. And Judge Casaba, I want to come to you because as I looked at some of your readings and writings, your decisions, you seem to have an affinity for Marxism. And in a 1994 essay, you criticize the concept of private property, and I'm going to quote you here. You argued that, and I quote, property incites rebellion, end quote. And this is one of the many positive statements that you have made about Marxist approaches and Marxist policies, Marxism, and you know, President Reagan, as I was reading some of your things that leaned toward Marxism, I thought of President Reagan's comments when he said that the March of Freedom and Democracy would leave Marxism on the ash heap of history, and that's exactly where it belongs, because Marxist regimes, as of 2023, have been responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people. So it disturbs me when I see this leaning to Marxism in your writings. So a yes or no question. Are you a Marxist?
No, Senator.
Okay. Will you right now disavow the tenets of Marxism that you have praised in some of your writings?
Senator, I have not praised Marxist ideas, and I would disavow any other system than that which is than that would be supported by our U.S. Constitution and our laws.
I appreciate your comment, but sir, in your writings, you have given the opposite opinion. But you've also made a number of concerning statements regarding sexuality and the disempowerment of women. Specifically, you've aligned yourself philosophically with a professor who has espoused the disturbing views that all heterosexual relationships are per se infused with violence and that all sexual acts should be viewed as rape. Not only is this view wrong and offensive, but also, and perhaps more importantly, it undercuts the important work that is being done across this country to empower survivors of sexual assault. When you say that all sexual acts are rape, you delegitimize and silence women who actually are victims of sexual assault. So how can women possibly trust that they will be treated fairly in your courtroom given your disturbing views on this subject?
Senator, that law review article to which you're referring, I believe was published, I wrote in 1995. I did not align myself with those ideas. The law review article summarizes several different
We're familiar with the article. Do you regret citing these very concerning statements?
Senator, the description or summary of these different theories is not a subscription to or an attestation of the validity.
Do you denounce the view that all women are per se disempowered by our system?
I do not ascribe to those theories that I was summarizing in that article. And I would also turn to my years of serving on the bench and treating all people fairly.
Let me move on. I've got 30 seconds. I also was troubled by your involvement as the prosecutor in the Gonzalez case. Mr. Gonzalez was arrested for allegedly raping a 12-year-old little girl. The FBI eventually reviewed the media seized from his home and identified horrific images of child sexual abuse. The sentencing memo that you prepared, oh, this is for Mr. Smith. Your sentencing memo, you outlined Mr. Gonzalez's heinous crimes. The images that were found on his phone were created in his home, in his own bedroom, with girls as young as 10 years old, and they found out he had parties. He would offer them illicit substances. He would then abuse them, and he did this multiple times over a 15-year period of time. It started in 1997, and still with all of that information, you went far below the guidelines. And in fact, for this repeat child abuser, you recommended a sentence of just over 10 years. And he had done this to kids for 15 years. So why did you do that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I do recall the case of Mr. Gonzalez. That was a case that I believe I was assigned when I had just started in the office. I recognized immediately the seriousness of those offenses, and I believe I had Mr. Gonzalez prosecuted within a month or so of my having been assigned the case. When I make sentencing recommendations in court, especially as a new prosecutor in the General Crimes Unit in the Southern District of New York, I make those sentencing recommendations.
Okay. Well, the court rejected your recommendation. They went above you to 15 years and then gave him an additional 10 years of probation. This is something that is terribly concerning to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to each of you. We always love getting to know more about our nominees, and I think it's wonderful when their families can come and be a part of the day. Mr. Ephraim, I want to come to you. I know you're aware of the circumstances around Michael Delaney's withdrawal for his nomination, and of course, the fact that he had used those hardball tactics against a minor girl who was a victim of sexual assault and chose to report it and chose to go forward with that prosecution, and the fact that he chose to name, to shame, and to really humiliate her is something that this panel objected to, and he did withdraw. And I was hopeful that we were going to see that the White House would bring us nominees that did not have questions. And I know you've talked a little bit about the Smith case, and I will get to that. I do want to go first to the Carpentino case. This really disturbed me. And I'll say it really disappointed me. So do you recall that case?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Now, that case, for my colleagues, so that they're aware, this man kidnapped a child and took her to an abandoned motel in Vermont, and then he raped her. But it was not the first time that he had abused children. In the sentencing memo that you wrote as the prosecutor, you noted that the defendant had just been released. He had just been released. So we learned that he was a convicted felon on multiple counts. So he had just been released from a 13-year prison sentence for sexually assaulting minors. Now, he repeatedly stripped his victims naked and attempted to sexually assault them while they tried to push him off. In one case, he smothered a little girl with a pillow while he raped her. In another case, he got so violent that he punched the victim in the face. By your own account, he was a sexual predator who was a clear and present danger to children in the community. Despite all of this, you still recommended a sentence far below the probation officer's suggested guidelines. Isn't that correct?
I mean, I don't know what the probation officer's recommendation was. 405-month sentence is well beyond 30 years in prison, Senator.
I'll be happy to tell you what that was, because I've got a memo on that. You recommended a sentence that was below what was recommended. In your sentencing memo, you wrote, and I'm going to quote you, "The sentence requested here will incapacitate the defendant until he is in his 60s. You knew what that sentence was. Hopefully, by that time, the danger that the defendant presents will have subsided." Mr. Ephraim, hopefully. Really? Hopefully? Hopefully? You're going to deliver justice to this guy who has a record? He's a sexual predator. He has raped these children. Were you really basing your sentence on hope?
Senator, I was basing my sentence on the sentencing guidelines, and that sentence...
No, sir, you did not follow the sentencing guidelines. I am sorry. I will be happy to submit that to you. Let's talk about the Smith case. This one made me want to throw up. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter, 3 years old. And the fact that this man he was guilty of manufacturing pornography. He created 6 videos of himself sexually abusing a 3-year-old girl. He did this. You noted that the most poignant evidence of the harm this victim caused was the look of fear in the young girl's eyes. This is astounding. And despite this, you recommended 60 years, even as the guidelines recommended life in prison. You just said you couldn't give him life, but no, the guidelines said you could give him life. How in heaven's name, sir? How could you let somebody off that raped a 3-year-old child? It is beyond me. I don't see how you could possibly have advocated for anything other than life for what he had done, and that is what the guideline called for.
Senator, the guidelines are overridden by the statutory maximums. 30 years is the statutory maximum for production of child pornography.
The guidelines were for life. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, pertaining to Mr. Ephraim from the previous hearing and panel, and we discussed the Smith case, I went back upstairs and pulled the sentencing memo. I've highlighted where the sentencing guidelines recommended a sentence of life imprisonment. I'd like to submit that for the record and clear the air on that issue.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Fonzone, I do want to come to you. Your position, if you're confirmed, would hold you responsible for reviewing all executive orders, providing legal guidance to each agency in the executive branch, and working closely with A.G. Garland, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, let's talk about this in light of the work you've done for the Chinese Communist Party and for Huawei. Because as Senator Graham said, we're going through a process of ripping and replacing Huawei equipment here in the U.S. And I'd like to know if you regret your work for Huawei, if you regret your work for the Chinese Communist Party, and if you regret advocating for the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, their MOFCOM, which in essence you would have been turning your back on American workers. Do you hold those actions in regret?
Senator, thank you for the question. As I said in response to the earlier question, I did a small amount of work at the request of my partners a long time ago. It hasn't affected my ability to, in my current role, to serve in my current role and provide objective legal advice as the General Counsel of the Office Director of National Intelligence. It would not affect my ability to serve at OLC. A lot of time has passed since I served on a moot court for a partner of mine who was arguing a case for the Ministry of Commerce.
Okay, my time is limited,
okay.
But you doubled down on this. You did more than just a little bit. And I think one of the things that concerns me is basically your work with the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. You were advising them on how to game the system, the American system, and that causes me concern. Let me ask you this, because you're going to be working with A.G. Garland, and there's been a lot of conversation from Tennesseans that I represent. They're very concerned about 2 tiers of justice and how this affects their lives. So I think it's important that you have the opportunity to assure the American people that you are not going to participate in 2 tiers of justice. And I'd like for you to weigh in for just about 30 seconds. Do you condemn the politicization of the Department of Justice and the actions that have taken place there against parents, against pro-lifers?
Senator, OLC is not a policymaking office. If I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, OLC's role is a reactive one. It answers legal questions presented to it by other parts of the executive branch. And if confirmed...
Do you condemn the politicization of the department?
Senator, my role at OLC would simply be to provide frank and independent legal advice.
So, okay. All right. So you're not going to do that. Okay. Mr. Keel, let me come to you. I think your mom deserves Mother of the Decade. And I'm delighted that she's here. Senator Hawley came to you on a question about ALDEF and some of their lack of ability to condemn Hamas. So I want to simplify this and see if we can get a response to you. Because, see, I think your approach and what you believe about things is important. It's important to Tennesseans. This is a life appointment. So knowing how people approach problem solving and approach issues is vitally important. And your answers were really quite troubling to me because it was a non-answer. And we would like something. So do you think that ALDEF needs to release a statement strongly condemning the actions of Hamas, this beheading of babies, this raping of women, this putting babies in an oven? Yes or no? Should they release a statement? Yes or no?
Senator, I don't know anything about the statement.
Okay, let's see. So you have not watched the news lately. Let's move on. Do you believe that Hamas is solely to blame for this unconscionable violence in Israel?
Senator, I tried to respond to Senator Hawley.
So that was a yes or no. So you don't have, see, this is what is of concern to me. Let's go at it this way. So do you believe this is a both sides issue? In other words, do you believe that both Hamas and Israel are to blame on this? Yes or no?
Senator, I don't believe it's a yes or no answer for me. It's a very complicated issue. It's a very tragic situation.
I think that the U.S. recognizes Hamas as a terrorist organization. This ought not to be complicated. I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to each of you and to your families and friends that are all here. I know it's a big day, and we appreciate your time. Judge Becerra, I want to come with you. You had a membership in the American Constitution Society from 2009 to 2010, correct?
I did.
Great. I've asked a previous nominee about their membership, so I'd like to ask you to get you on the record about this. I want to read you a portion of the mission statement from the ACS website. It states that ACS's mission includes redressing, and I quote, the founding failures of our Constitution and enduring inequities in our laws in pursuit of realized equality, end quote. So in your role as an advocate and now as a magistrate judge, do you subscribe to that part of the mission statement? And what do you see as the enduring inequities in our laws that need to be redressed?
So thank you for the question, Senator Blackburn. As you noted, I'm no longer a member of the ACS. I was a member of the ACS for a short period of time. It may not surprise you to know that I was a high school debater. And some friends of mine who are old high school debaters wanted to start a chapter in Miami to encourage debate and debate on legal questions. That didn't really go so well. We weren't very successful. And then after that, I went back to tend to the business of my law firm.
Do you subscribe to the mission statement? That's what I'm asking you.
So, Senator, I'm not familiar with their mission statement today. I haven't kept up with it.
So you joined but did not notice the mission statement?
Senator, I'm not even sure if that was the mission statement back 15 years ago.
Right. We will, that is their recorded statement. So do you see enduring inequities in our laws?
Senator, what I know is enduring about our laws is the Constitution and the values and the rights that are in the Constitution. And as a sitting magistrate judge, that is what I honor.
All right. Let me move on with you. I want to ask you about some comments that you defended, comments that Justice Sotomayor made. And Justice O'Connor once said that a wise old man and a wise old woman would reach the same conclusion in deciding cases. And I agree with that. Justice Sotomayor did not. So in response to Justice O'Connor, she went so far as to say, and I'm quoting her, "I would hope that a wise Latina woman with the richness of her experiences would more often than not reach a better conclusion than a white male who hasn't lived that life," end quote. So you defended those comments by saying they were taken out of context, but I've given you the full sentence. So I'd like to know, do you think the law is subjective? Do you think that you should be ruling on the rule of law? Do you think that a judge's experiences should weigh into the decision that they make?
Senator, I think that a judge's role, and the role that I have played for the last 5 years, is to look at the facts honestly and scrupulously, to be a student of the law, and to apply the facts to the law in an impartial way. I don't believe a judge's personal opinion or personal opinions should affect that.
Okay, do you regret having defended that statement?
I don't believe I defended the statement. I think what was happening at the time is she had just been nominated. I had been asked.
All right, let me move on. I've got 1 minute then. I want to ask you about sentencing guidelines, and reading some of these things in the background, I was a little bit concerned if you had felt things should be subjectively done, if you felt like there were inequities in the law. See, you can see, looking at your background, where I would come up with some of that. So we had a nominee recently, a judge, Mr. Aframe, and he had refused to follow sentencing guidelines in a horrific child pornography case. The guidelines recommended a life in prison sentence, and he chose to go for a 60-year sentence. And to me, that would be a disqualifier. It is a disqualifier. This is someone I will not vote for. Is there any scenario where you would deviate from sentencing guidelines recommendation of life imprisonment for a lower sentence?
So, Senator, the factors of 3553 are very clear, and those are what I will follow. The sentencing guidelines, of course, are no longer mandatory, but how we apply them is guided by the precedent of the 11th Circuit, and that is what I would follow. When I was a prosecutor many years ago here in the District of Columbia, there were the guidelines didn't apply here. And so I saw firsthand what some of the inequities could be when you didn't have the guidelines. And then, of course, I was a prosecutor in Miami for many years when the guidelines were mandatory. And so I've been a prosecutor in both of those scenarios. And so from my perspective, I think you follow the factors that you are allowed to follow, that you are told to follow by this body, and then you are guided by 11th Circuit precedent in how you determine those factors.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to each of you on your nominations. Ms. Berner, I do want to come to you. There's been much discussion about your work as General Counsel at the SEIU. And I am the top Republican on the Human Rights and the Law Subcommittee. We put a lot of work into looking at the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, sexual assault issue. And Senator Gillibrand and I just recently in the last year passed a piece of legislation, the Speak Out Act, which would disallow pre-dispute non-disclosure agreements in these cases of sexual assault. So I know that Senator Lee and Senator Kennedy have asked you about this issue, and I'm going to come back to you on it because it is extremely concerning to me. And when we look at the courts, when we look at the federal government, when we look at corporations, and we discussed this issue yesterday in a hearing on corporate conduct, the fact that this is continuing is of concern to us. In your actions, what we see as being your actions in the case with Ms. Sturgis, with Mr. Regan, is incredibly disturbing because it appears that the union knew about these allegations and the union failed to take action. And then they continued to support the men that had carried out these allegations. And when you look at the conduct of Mr. Regan and the fact that he is still there, and the fact that he was known, this wasn't something that was hearsay, he was known for going to conferences, for getting drunk at the conference, and inappropriately dancing with female employees. So this was known behavior and conduct. And what it appears is this is just the tip of the iceberg with what took place at the SEIU. And one of Mr. Regan's top lieutenant, Stan Lyles, was also accused of misconduct. So you can see our concern. It looks like this conduct was standard operating procedure and that it was accepted and expected. And you did nothing about it. And that is the impression that is being given to us, and your hesitancy to answer these questions and come forward with an answer really does cause us concern. Now, in responding to Mr. Lyle's accuser, Mindy Sturge, you said that the matter was best left to be investigated by the local SEIU, the same union whose president, Ms. Sturge, was suing for sexual misconduct. So this is inconceivable. What was your expectation about this woman getting a fair outcome from having the abuser actually handle the investigation? Did you expect him to say, "I was wrong"? Did you expect him to handle it fairly? Because the answer would be, of course the guy's not going to be fair because the woman is accusing him. And this is exactly why we moved forward with cleaning this process up. So the appearance to us is that you were a party to this allowing this bad conduct. And it causes me pain to think that at a time when we're trying to get to the bottom of what's happening with this sexual assault, with these sex trafficking rings, that you as a judge would sit on a federal bench and a woman who is coming before you to have justice would not be given a fair shot at that justice. So do you regret this? Do you think these people should be removed? What is your position, and how would you like to clarify the record? Because right now, this allowing this misconduct, pushing it to the abuser to handle a case of the accuser, this is something that is unacceptable.
Senator, I have dedicated my career to representing women and families, and I take every allegation of sexual assault and sexual misconduct seriously, whether levied at my client or whether it is an allegation.
This is a stock remark, and Mr. Chairman, I know I'm over time, but we have
Senator,
got to get to the bottom.
Senator, I'm going to give her the right to complete her answer.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Senator, what I can tell you is that I take all allegations of sexual assault seriously, that I have faithfully carried out my role as an advocate, and that if I were so fortunate as to be confirmed, any position that I had taken on behalf of a client would not have any relevance to any decision that I made as a judge. My position is taken as an advocate I was advocating on behalf of my client. And if I were to be confirmed, I would be in the role of a neutral, where I would faithfully apply the relevant precedent to the facts in the case before me, and I would do as I have done throughout my career.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to each of you. Mr. Alley, I understand that you have disavowed the defund the police movement.
Senator, I've made clear that I've never taken that position, and I wouldn't for any number of reasons.
Even though the senator did. Let me ask you about, I know you live in D.C., and so crime in D.C. The D.C. City Council has cut the police budget by $15 million. The resources for D.C. police were decimated, and crime is out of control. Yet we've seen a former Trump administration official that was murdered and carjackings. So do you agree with what the D.C. City Council is doing to defund the police?
Senator, as I've made clear, I've never taken the position of defunding the police, nor would I. And I've worked closely with law enforcement precisely because I care, in addition to accountability, about public safety very deeply, including in the district.
Thank you for that. I do want to talk with you about some of the clients that you've represented. I do a lot on protecting women and children, and you have filed a number of briefs in federal court representing rapists, terrorists, and child sexual abusers. And every criminal defendant deserves adequate representation. We talk about that here in this committee, and I want to be sure to get you on the record about your involvement in some of these cases involving child sexual abuse material. The chairman has done a good bit of work on that. We recently had a nominee come before us, Seth Aframe, who refused to follow sentencing guidelines in a horrific child pornography case, and the guidelines were for a life sentence, but he sought 60 years. So given your previous work representing the interest of criminals with child sexual abuse, I want to get you on the record. Is there ever a scenario in which you would deviate from the sentencing guideline recommendations of life imprisonment for a crime involving the sexual abuse of a child?
Senator, if I could just say at the outset, I have represented multiple victims of violence. I have represented, the center has represented numerous people who were victims of child abuse and child sexual abuse. And so I have seen firsthand how devastating that can be to families.
So let me ask you about Hire versus the Bureau of Prisons. You recall that?
I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, the MacArthur Center filed an amicus brief on behalf of a criminal defendant who was previously convicted of unconscionable conduct, abducting a 10-year-old boy at knife point, raping him, burying him alive. It's horrifying. And the defendant also admitted to molesting more than 40 children. Think about that. So it is my understanding that when this amicus brief was filed in 2019, you were overseeing the center's D.C. office. In fact, you've been an integral part of the center's work for many years. So are you comfortable with the center's representation of a defendant who committed these heinous acts?
So, Senator, let me just say at the outset that the center has represented a number of people who were victims of child sexual abuse and horrific
This is a child
crime.
molester.
Yes,
This is a child abuser that the center filed an amicus brief on behalf.
I was just acknowledging the kind of seeing firsthand how devastating that can be. I think it's important at the outset of discussing any of these sorts of issues. I'm not familiar with the matter you referred to. I was the director of the DC office. I wasn't the director of the entire organization or overseeing all of the amicus briefs. So I'm not familiar with that particular case. I'd be happy to look into it and understand the context. I can tell you, though, Senator, that when we file an amicus brief in a case, it is not about the specific tragic fact. It's about a broader principle of law that is applicable beyond that particular case.
Thank you. I want to move on. Judge DuBose, I want to come to you. I know that there's been discussion about you saying that using the "I was in a Marxist phase" and an explanation for that. Do you understand why that causes us pause?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And yes, it does. And I have to say, when I was given a copy of that article yesterday, I was shocked. I had no idea. When I read the article, I couldn't understand the context. If you had that opportunity to read it, there were some things that were placed in quotes. There were some points where the student was writing about herself. So I, as I sit here today, don't even recall having that comment.
As you sit here today, will you right now disavow the basic tenets of Marxism?
As I mentioned, Senator, I am not, nor I've ever been.
No?
I am not a Marxist. I do not espouse Marxist theory or ideology. I never have. I never will. I'm a very proud Democrat here and part of a Democrat. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Judge, welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. I want to talk to you about your relationship with demand justice. And during your last confirmation process before this committee, you said in response to a question for the record that you've spoken with Demand Justice's co-founder, Chris King, and I'm quoting you, a couple of times about the judicial nominations process, end quote. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. I've looked at the positions that Demand Justice has taken, and one of their priorities has been to expand the Supreme Court. So did you speak with Mr. King about expanding the Supreme Court?
No, Senator Blackburn. My conversations with Mr. King were limited to getting advice and guidance on how the nomination process worked. It was quite opaque to me at that point, and so he provided guidance.
Do you support increasing the number of justices on the Supreme Court?
That is a matter that I am precluded from opining on under the canons. But I think if you look at my record, I've never taken that position.
I don't think you're precluded on giving an opinion as to whether or not you think that the Supreme Court should be expanded. And Demand Justice has suggested that adding 4 justices would bring, and I quote them, restore balance and integrity. So do you think that there's a particular number of justices that should be added to the Supreme Court?
Senator Blackburn, I have never taken any position on this. I don't think it's appropriate for me to opine on it.
Okay, Demand Justice claims that the Supreme Court is, and I'm quoting them, unethical, unaccountable, and out of control. Do you share that assessment?
Senator, I don't have a relationship with Demand Justice. I've only spoken to Mr. King on a couple occasions several years ago. I'm not familiar with their positions, but I don't associate myself with those.
Obviously, you respected him, or you wouldn't have called him and gotten advice from him. So that is what concerns me, that you would go to a far left-leaning group to get advice on how to come before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I want to, Senator Kennedy talked with you about your ranking, and you are, as he told you, number 1 at having the biggest backlog in the 7th Circuit, and you're number 7 nationwide with outstanding motions. And the thing, as I looked at this, Judge, what is very curious to me is how you're so out of step with the other district judges as far as managing your time and moving cases forward and actually making decisions. I looked at the alarm detection systems case, and you've had a fully briefed motion since September of 22. And then the Palladino Wells Fargo case you've had since November of 22. So I am I understand how time-consuming the work is. I understand, and let me tell you, we do a lot of reading. We do a lot of prep work for our hearings. But I find it interesting that when you have a fully briefed case in front of you, you cannot come to a decision. So what hinders you from being able to arrive at decisions when you have everything you need to make the decision?
Thank you, Senator. I wouldn't say that I'm hindered in my decision-making. In fact, if you look at my record, I am a fan of ruling on the record. And so I've done decided many motions on the record at hearings over the course of several hours. So I'm not hindered.
District Judge, let's talk about that, because I went in and looked at your record, and I noted the fact that you've only presided over one civil trial to verdict in your nearly 2 years on the bench. One trial, just one. And that, combined with the fact that you had tried only 3 cases when you were in private practice, leads me to question your fitness for the court. So how can you expect us to confirm you to the circuit court when in 2 years you've presided over one civil trial and your backlog is larger than nearly everyone else? What would qualify you?
Senator, I would look at the quality of my decision-making.
Other judges find a way to do expediency and quality of work. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by saying just how disappointed I am that the Biden administration has once again shown little regard for the long-standing bipartisan tradition of consulting home state senators on judicial nominees. Senator Hagerty and I attempted to work in good faith with the administration. We identified highly qualified nominees to fill this vacancy, but unfortunately, the White House had other plans. It is abundantly clear that despite the White House assurances to the contrary, there was a backroom deal to appoint Mr. Ritz to this vacancy from the very start. But the most glaring example of the White House outright refusal to consult is the fact that they have not even bothered to ask what our objections to Mr. Ritz might be. Had they done so, I would have explained my serious concerns about his professional ethics, concerns that should alarm those in the White House pushing his nomination, and concerns that we have heard from many of his peers. In our country, every individual accused of a crime is entitled to due process under the law. That is a bedrock principle of justice. But that's not how Mr. Ritz has operated as a prosecutor. Mr. Ritz has been accused of using highly unethical bait-and-switch tactics to trick indigent criminal defendants into accepting plea deals they didn't agree to. And when defense attorneys pushed back, Mr. Ritz has been accused of making outright false statements to the court to cover up his misdeeds. Indeed, Mr. Ritz has chosen to surround himself with those who seemingly treat their ethical obligations with disdain. Mr. Ritz's deputy, for example, received a 1-year probation for prosecutorial misconduct. We have heard from many of his peers and colleagues. You don't have to take my word for it. Just ask Stephen Shankman, the former federal public defender for the Western District of Tennessee. Mr. Ritz has such a reputation for unethical behavior that when Mr. Shankman first heard reports of a prosecutor behaving unethically, he knew it had to be Kevin Ritz. Writing about Mr. Ritz, Mr. Shankman said, and I quote, This is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred, but everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware, your client should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution, end quote. You should proceed with extreme caution. What an admonition. Is that how the American citizen should be made to feel if they were to go into a courtroom with the presiding judge being Kevin Ritz? With an ethical record like this, I question how the ABA could give him any rating other than not qualified. He has no business representing the United States in a courtroom, let alone presiding as a judge with a lifetime appointment. But Mr. Ritz's record of unethical behavior isn't my only objection. Under his watch, as the chief federal law enforcement officer, the city of Memphis has become the most dangerous place to live in the United States. That is a fact. In 2023, Memphis had the most homicides in its history, and data shows that 2024 homicides are going to outpace 2023. Law and order has completely collapsed in Memphis under his leadership, and there is no more tragic example than last week's murder of a Memphis police officer. Officer Joseph McKinney was shot and killed on Friday by a criminal who had been arrested just weeks prior for 4 felonies, including unlawful possession of a weapon and possession of an illegal Glock switch. Make no mistake, the criminal would not have been out on the streets but for Mr. Ritz falling asleep at the wheel. His inaction has cost lives. Prior to Mr. Ritz's tenure, the U.S. Attorney's Office had a policy of charging 100% of prosecutable gun crimes. Why Mr. Ritz did not follow through on this, I do not understand. But we do know a police officer, a father, and a Memphian, they are dead because of Mr. Ritz's lack of leadership.
Senator, your time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ritz, I will tell you, I have been so disappointed as things have come through. Senator Hagerty and I gave you the benefit of the doubt for the U.S. Attorney, but we have heard from so many people in West Tennessee of their frustration with you. So when you look at this, how can criminal defendants that come before you as a judge think you're going to give them a fair shake? How can attorneys that expect their clients to be treated fairly in the courtroom expect that you're going to behave ethically and not discredit them, not discredit the attorneys?
Senator, in my career, 19 years, the only job I've had as a lawyer is to represent the interests of the United States and keep people safe in our state.
How about the people of Tennessee?
And we represent the people.
Because that should be a priority too. You referenced the previous allegation against you. The court never addressed that because the attorney withdrew from the case. Okay, let me ask you this. You hired a number 2, Reagan Taylor Fondren, who received a year of probation for prosecutorial misconduct, including unconstitutionally burying evidence and misleading the court. Why did you hire her, and what was the follow-on with that?
Senator, our first assistant United States attorney, I did not hire Ms. Fondren. She has been a dedicated public servant her whole career. I promoted her to be first assistant. As with all of my AUSAs, I am proud of the work that they do to uphold the rule of law and protect people.
Let's talk about the people of West Tennessee, because your primary duty as a U.S. attorney is to keep the people of West Tennessee safe. Memphis is more dangerous under your leadership, and it's a direct result of your lax policies of not prosecuting violent crime. We know about the Lobley case, and we know that he had been charged with 4 felonies, including unlawful possession. So the Shelby County DA has publicly stated that the Lobley case was accepted for federal prosecution. Is that accurate?
Senator,
Yes or no?
9 days before the tragic killing of Officer
Yes or no?
McKinney, our office did accept that for potential federal prosecution. We were
Okay.
diligently investigating
Let's
that
talk
case.
about this. The prior U.S. attorney brought 100% of prosecutable gun cases. If you weren't in charge, Mr. Lobley would have been behind bars.
I want to say, Senator, if I may, I have no control over the state system. Mr. Lobley had been arrested in the state system and released on bond in the
Federal
state.
charges.
He was arrested.
Federal charges. You and the DA have a difference of opinion on this.
No.
Because he says he was accepted for federal prosecution.
And referenced
So-
for our consideration, but we had not yet charged Mr. Lobley, Senator.
Okay, so you were not moving at the pace of your predecessor. Let me move on to sex offenders. Because in May of last year, you stated, and I quote, "Most convicted sex offenders who live and work in West Tennessee are productive members of the community." What would you say to the families whose children's lives have been ruined by sexual exploitation and abuse? And how do you think that they feel knowing that the chief law enforcement officer, their chief federal law enforcement officer, believes that these sex abusers are productive members of the community?
Senator, I don't believe I said that.
I'll
there may
provide
be,
you with the quote.
I'd be happy to respond in writing,
Yes.
but I can tell you, Senator, we have an
You
active...
made that quote. Let me move on because if you'll respond in writing, I wanted to raise the issue we talked about previously, which is you removed the Tennessee flag from the U.S. Attorney's office after you were sworn in. And we have heard from several people that you did this. So I want to know, you told me it was because you thought the office was cluttered that you removed the flag. But you were there for the people of West Tennessee. You removed the Tennessee flag. So what did you do with it? Did you throw it in the trash? Did you put it in the closet? Why did you not see your appointment as having a duty to the people of West Tennessee?
As Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer, Senator, I represent the United States and the Department of Justice. And we're talking about the conference room where we give press conferences and similar public statements. And I felt it was fundamentally...
Mr. Ritz, that doesn't fly. Mr. Chairman, I've got the sex abuse quote. I'll submit it for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Judge Kidd, I want to ask you about U.S. versus Rodriguez-Sanchez. You remember that case?
Senator, the name does not ring a bell, but perhaps
Okay.
the facts might.
All right, this was an illegal immigrant from Mexico, and you ordered him released from federal custody pending trial. And he had quite a criminal history. He had a series of charges, including resisting an officer with violence, 2 charges of domestic violence. He was deported by ICE in 2011. And then at some point, he illegally re-entered the country. Now, in deciding to release this illegal alien, you essentially determined that under the Bail Reform Act, he did not pose a danger to the community. Do you think that crimes of domestic violence are serious enough to impose a danger to the community?
To answer that question, Senator, yes, and I don't recall that specific case, but if this were an illegal reentry case, I would note that it's pretty rare that release is granted in those cases, so I imagine I also would have placed him on house arrest or
Well,
with GPS
he was
monitoring.
on an ICE detainer when you decided to release him. And another consideration for deciding whether to release a criminal defendant pending trial is if they pose a flight risk. And how could you possibly argue that an illegal alien with a criminal record was, and they were going to be deported by ICE, that they were not a flight risk?
Senator, in those cases, the question is whether there are any conditions that I could impose that would mitigate any risk of flight. And again, I don't recall that specific one, but generally, if it's...
Would you like to review that and then submit an answer to me in your questions? Because to me, when we're looking at crime that is committed by illegal entrants into this country, this is something that is of tremendous concern to me. Another one that is of concern to me is the article, and Senator Lee mentioned the article to you that deals with child rape laws. And I've done a lot of work working on children that are being trafficked. And the chairman's done a lot of work dealing with child sexual abuse and exploitative material. But the fact that you were listed as having had conversations that shaped an article about capital child rape laws is of concern to me. One of your statements, and I'm going to quote you on this, is that capital child rape statutes are formed at the nexus of three movements: the popular movement to shame, fear, and isolate sex offenders, the feminist movement for harsher punishment of sexual and intrafamilial violence, and the legal and political movement to punish attacks against vulnerable victims with death. So there's a lot in that. So do you think there is currently a popular movement to shame, fear, and isolate sex offenders?
Senator, that was not my statement.
That was not your statement. It's an article you contributed to, and that is the author stating, and I'm quoting that. That was it. So do you agree with that? Do you think that there is a popular movement to shame, to fear, to isolate sex offenders? Do you think sex offenders are criminals? Or do you see them as victims? Do you think that there is a feminist movement that is pushing for harsher penalties and punishments of sexual and intrafamilial violence?
Senator, as a former prosecutor, I prosecuted many cases involving sex offenses, and I believe that those offenses and those people who commit them should be punished.
Let me ask you this. Do you think it's wrong for the article to advocate for harsher punishments for sexual and intrafamilial incest violence?
Do I think that it's wrong to advocate for harsher punishment? Senator, as to the particular policy considerations, I would leave to this body. But again, as a former prosecutor, I did seek significant punishments for those who engaged in those offenses.
Okay, why don't you pull your records and let us know how many conversations you had with the author that shaped the contents of the article. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.